Welcome back to my channel, the best place for Asian parents to learn more about parenting, education, and soft skills. Do you feel that the Ontario education system is always striking and that their priorities are out of whack and that they're almost holding like the whole province as hostage against the government? If you do, I don't blame you because that's actually what's happening with their collective bargaining moves. Now, this video is going to be about how parents can navigate the situation by answering the question, is public education better than private? If you are interested in this topic, then keep on watching. Now first, you gotta weigh the pros and cons of public education, right? So the pros for public education in Ontario is pretty obvious. Number one, Ontario's education system is highly ranked around the world, meaning that it's actually very respectable. We got a very solid public education system. In the PISA rankings, which is a cross-national comparison of public education systems, Ontario consistently ranks at the top with the other education systems of the world. Now, another major pro of the Ontario education system is that it's obviously free. Well, technically you paid for it already with your taxes, but it is free and you don't have to give too much additional expense unless you want to tap into extra programs such as the IB curriculum or whatnot. In addition, the Ontario education system also has a lot of regulation, meaning the teachers are never going to be that bad. Now mind you, they might not be that great, but there are a lot of checks and balances to make sure that the quality is consistent. So if the teachers aren't very good, then the principal can look into that. And if the principal isn't very good, the superintendent can look into that. And if the superintendent is very good, there's always a next step where you can file your complaints, right? So there are a lot of pros in that regard. However, there are also a lot of cons to going with a free public education system. And one of those cons is that, well, the bad teachers don't get fired. They are protected by the union, right? So I know I'm speaking in generalities because there are a lot of great teachers in the public education system, but also the bad ones don't really get removed. So thinking back on my own high school career as a student, there were teachers that were great, but there were many teachers that were terrible, and you just wonder, like, you look miserable in your job and how do you even have your job? So I still remember a math teacher of mine who was literally just copying off the book onto the board, and I wasn't doing very well in that math class, so I kind of asked all my other classmates, like, hey, is it just me, or like I'm not understanding anything that's going on in this class? And my classmates at that time was like, what, you haven't heard her reputation? Like, this teacher does not know how to teach, she doesn't know her content, and basically everyone in that class was getting tutoring to pass grade 11 math. Now, that was the kind of situation, and this teacher has been around forever, and no matter what you do, you can't remove her. And so that's kind of like a major problem in the public education system, right? In addition, if you want extra stuff, it's always tough to negotiate for that because teachers are always bounded by their collective bargaining agreements that they can't go the extra mile, because if they do go the extra mile, then it's going to make everyone look bad. Like if they stay past a certain hour, then the union basically can go to that teacher and say, hey, you're putting in too many hours, you're making the other teachers look bad, and so stop doing this, right? And so oftentimes public education, you have these limitations, you have these bad apples that just make the whole thing look bad, and God forbid if you get a bad principal, because a bad principal can really make the whole system just crash. In addition, the public education system is also susceptible to curriculum changes. So for example, in Ontario, the Wynne government previously had this type of creative, show your work, think outside the box type of math, and is more about problem solving and expressing and so on. And the Ford government comes in and then they just revamp the whole curriculum. And so what parents have been banking on for the last almost a decade suddenly gets changed to go back to the old system. And so these kind of things just kind of provide a lot of instability for parents. In addition, I obviously don't have to say that the public system is susceptible to strikes every few years, right? So pretty much every time there's a collective bargaining agreement, there's always going to be a strike that goes with it. Now, the alternative to the public system is obviously the private system, and the private system has its pros and cons too, right? So let me tell you the pros first. Now, obviously the pro is that the parent has a lot more say in their children's education. So in a public system, if you hand your child over to the public system and you say, hey, my child has special needs, and you fill out the form that, you know, authorizes the school to work with a special needs child, then pretty much the educators in the school are the experts, and parents are only kind of consulted, right? Parents don't really have too much leverage in the whole conversation about how their child is and so on. Now, there are obviously benefits to that, because not all parents are going to know education very well and know how to teach their kid or be able to understand how best to help their kid in education. So sometimes you just hand it to the experts, and that's great. But at the same time, parents are often just, you know, you're just kind of consulted, and the school kind of does its own thing, and it kind of enters this whole black box where you can't really intervene because the school has taken charge of it. In a private system, that's different, because private systems basically sell on their niche. So if you look at all the private education systems out there, it's pretty much selling on a niche. Whether it's an all-boys school, all-girls school, whether it's a religious school such as a Christian school, a Muslim school, or whether it's a sports school, it's an IB school, it's a high-achieving school, it's a gifted school, it's a school for ADHD kids. However, private schools also have its cons. Now, one of the most obvious cons is that private schools are expensive. You gotta pay a lot of money for them because there is no public funding, right? Now, that's on top of the taxes that you're already paying for a public education system that you're not using. So at least in Ontario, that's the case. Other provinces may be different, where you're able to pull public funding out to put into private education of your choice. Another major drawback of private education is that sometimes the quality control can be a little bit wonky. So when I say that, I've worked in private schools before, and when it's great, it can be really awesome. So they pay a lot for the teachers' training. So I worked at an IB school before, and we got sent to training here and there for IB, and it was awesome. However, when crap hit the fan and the school suddenly had a financial crisis, what happened was that the whole system pretty much crumbled and fell apart, and that there was major distrust, there was no moderation, there was no arbiter coming in to fix the problem, and pretty much everyone was up in arms, and it was just chaos, right? And so in a public system, that will not happen, because there is a strong chain of command. In a private school, the chain of command would be teachers, and then it'll go to administrators, and then it'll go to a board. If all three levels of the school is dysfunctional, then pretty much the whole school will be in chaos. And so that's another major drawback of going to a private education. The quality control is a question mark, and also the governance and administration is also a question mark if it's not solid. And the last thing that is kind of like a double-edged sword for private education is that it's for profit. Now, being for profit is great because they are incentivized to provide the best education possible. However, being for profit also means that the money kind of goes into their own pockets, right? So it depends how the school is run. So in Ontario, we have independent schools and we have private schools. And independent schools are governed by a board, and they've got a long history, and they're generally pretty top solid schools. Now, on the other hand, there's a lot of private schools that are being founded where people are just investing money to create these new schools so that they can provide an education, but at the same time it's for them to fill in their own pockets. So the tuition that you're paying them, you know, how much of it is actually going to your kid? That's always a big question mark. So that's another concern with private schools. So having worked in both private and public schools, I can say confidently that parents really just need to future-proof their kid, meaning that both systems has its pros and cons. There are great public education systems, and there are also great private education systems, and there are also very terrible ones as well. Now, at the end of the day, an education is meant to set your child up for success. So the bottom line is to future-proof your kid so that your kid knows what he or she wants to do in the future, and backward design based on that. And that's one of the major problems that public education is failing right now, in the sense that they're kind of like number one, it's a big bureaucratic system, and number two, even their careers program that's mandatory in grade 10 is generally boring and not very helpful, at least based on the feedback that I hear from the students that I talk to. And so what parents really need to do is future-proof their kid by finding out what's the direction of their child's career. Now, if you speak to a child, it's like, hey, what's your career in the future? You know, when you think back on when you were that age, you'll kind of be like, you know, I have no idea what I want to do for the future, and just kind of figure it out. But the point is, there is a way to figure this out. There's a system for you to figure it out early so that you can align the education suitably to achieve that goal. And that's the bottom line. In order to future-proof your kid so that it doesn't matter if your child goes to public or private education, what matters is your child knows who they are, what their personality is like, what their values are like, what are their skills, and what they want to do for the future. So regardless of whether the public education system is striking or the private system is crashing, your kid will be alright. And that really is the bottom line for education. So in this video, I kind of gave you the bare bones of comparing public and private schools. Now, if you want a lot more detail, I actually made a playlist, which I'll put up here, where I outline all the pros and cons that I can think of, right? And I back it up with a white paper, which I'll put in the description below, with citations of the research that I did on making my point. And so if you want a copy of the white paper, just click the link below in the description and download it. Or if you want to watch the video, click the playlist above to watch the full video series on comparing public and private education. So if you like this video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe, and of course click the notification bell to receive notifications on future videos. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.